Dutch elm disease is caused by a member of the sac fungi affecting elm trees, and is spread by the elm bark beetle. Although believed to be originally native to Asia, the disease has been accidentally introduced into America and Europe, where it has devastated native populations of elms that did not have resistance to the disease. It has also reached New Zealand. The name Dutch elm disease refers to its identification in 1921 and later in the Netherlands by Dutch phytopathologists Schwarz and Christine Buisman, who both worked with Professor Johanna Westerdijk. The disease is not specific to the Dutch elm hybrid. Overview. The causative agents of DED are Ascomycete microfungi. 3 species are now recognized. Ophiostoma ulmi, which afflicted Europe from 1910, reaching North America on imported timber in 1928. Ophiostoma himil ulmi, a species endemic to the western Himalaya. Ophiostoma novo ulmi, an extremely virulent species from Japan which was first described in Europe and North America in the 1940s and has devastated elms in both continents since the late 1960s. DED is spread in North America by 3 species of bark beetles: the native elm bark beetle, Hyliorgopinus rufipes; the European elm bark beetle, Scolytus multistriatus; the banded elm bark beetle, Scolytus skevirowi. In Europe, while S. multistriatus still acts as a vector for infection, it is much less effective than the large elm bark beetle S. Scolytus. H. rufipes can be a vector for the disease, but is inefficient compared to the other vectors. S. skevirowi was found in 2003 in Colorado and Utah. Mechanism. In an attempt to block the fungus from spreading farther, the tree reacts by plugging its own xylem tissue with garmentyluses, bladder-like extensions of the xylem cell wall. As the xylem delivers water and nutrients to the rest of the plant, these plugs prevent them from traveling up the trunk of the tree, eventually killing it. Signs. The first sign of infection is usually an upper branch of the tree with leaves starting to wither and yellow in summer, months before the normal autumnal leaf shedding. This progressively spreads to the rest of the tree, with further dieback of branches. Eventually, the roots die, starved of nutrients from the leaves. Often, not all the roots die. The roots of some species, notably the English elm Ulmus procera, put up suckers which flourish for approximately 15 years, after which they too succumb. Disease range. Europe. Dutch elm disease was first noticed in continental Europe in 1910, and spread slowly, reaching Britain in 1927 and eventually extending to all other countries in Europe except Greece and Finland. This first strain was a relatively mild one, which killed only a small proportion of elms, more often just killing a few branches, and had largely died out by 1940 due to its susceptibility to viruses. The disease was isolated in the Netherlands in 1921 by B. Schwarz, a pioneering Dutch phytopathologist, and this discovery would lend the disease its name. Circa 1967, a new, far more virulent strain arrived in Britain on a shipment of rock elm U. Thomasii logs from North America, and this strain proved both highly contagious and lethal to European elms. More than 25 million trees have died in the UK alone, while France has lost over 90% of her elms. The disease is still migrating northwards through Scotland, reaching Edinburgh in the late 1970s, and Inverness in 2006. By 1990, very few mature elms were left in Britain and much of continental Europe. One of the most distinctive English countryside trees, the English elm U. Procera salus B., is particularly susceptible. 30 years after the outbreak of the epidemic, nearly all these trees, which often grew to more than 45 meters high, are gone. The species still survives in hedgerows, as the roots are not killed and send up root sprouts. These suckers rarely reach more than 5 meters tall before succumbing to a new attack of the fungus. However, established hedges kept low by clipping have remained apparently healthy throughout the nearly 40 years since the onset of the disease in the UK. The largest concentrations of mature elms in Europe are now in Amsterdam and The Hague. In 2005, Amsterdam was declared the Elm City of Europe. The city's streets and canals are lined with at least 75,000 elms, including several generations of research elms. Some 30,000 of the 100,000 mature trees in The Hague are elms, planted because of the tolerance of salty sea winds. Since the 1990s, a program of antifungal injections of the most prominent 10,000 elms, and of sanitation felling, has reduced annual elm losses in The Hague from 7% to less than 1%. The losses are made up by the planting of disease-resistant cultivars. The largest concentration of mature elm trees remaining in England is in Brighton and Hove, East Sussex, where of the 30,000 elms in 1983, 15,000 still stand, several of which are estimated to be over 400 years old. The survival is owing to the isolation of the area between the English Channel and the South Downs, and the assiduous efforts of local authorities to identify and remove infected sections of trees immediately when they show symptoms of the disease. Empowered by the Dutch Elm Disease Order 1988, local authorities may order the destruction of any infected trees or timber, although in practice they usually do it themselves, successfully reducing the numbers of elm bark beetles Colitis spp. The vector of elm disease. Sanitary felling has also, to date, preserved most of the 250,000 elms on the Isle of Man. The largest concentration of mature elms in Scotland is in Edinburgh, where over 5,000 remained in 2009 from some 35,000 in 1976. The City Council gives the overall number of elms as 15,000. Edinburgh's Leith Links and Meadows have some of the highest concentrations of mature elms among UK parks. A policy of sanitary felling has kept losses in the city to an average of 1,000 a year. Elm was the most common tree in Paris from the 17th century. Before the 1970s there were some 30,000 elms Parisians. Today, only 1,000 mature elms survive in the city, including examples in the large avenues and 2 very old specimens, one in the garden of the Tuileries in front of the L'Orangerie and another in the Place Saint-Gervais in front of Hôtel de Ville de Paris. Losses are now being made up with disease-resistant cultivars, especially the Dutch-French research elm Nangwen, named after the city. North America. The disease was first reported in the United States in 1928, with the beetles believed to have arrived in a shipment of logs from the Netherlands destined for use as veneer in the Ohio furniture industry. Quarantine and sanitation procedures held most cases within 150 miles of metropolitan New York City until 1941, when war demands began to curtail them. The disease spread from New England westward and southward, almost completely destroying the famous elms in the Elm City of New Haven, Connecticut, reaching the Detroit area in 1950, the Chicago area by 1960, and Minneapolis by 1970. Of the estimated 77 million elms in North America in 1930, over 75% had been lost by 1989. Dutch elm disease reached eastern Canada during the Second World War and spread to Ontario in 1967, Manitoba in 1975, and Saskatchewan in 1981. In Toronto, 80% of the elm trees have been lost to Dutch elm disease. Many more fell victim in Ottawa, Montreal and other cities during the 1970s and 1980s. Quebec City still has about 21,000 elms, thanks to a prevention program initiated in 1981. Alberta and British Columbia are the only provinces that are currently free of Dutch elm disease, although in an isolated case, an elm tree in southeastern Alberta found diseased in 1998 was immediately destroyed. Today, Alberta has the largest number of elms unaffected by Dutch elm disease in the world. Many streets and parks in Edmonton and Calgary are still lined with healthy, mature trees. Aggressive measures are being taken to prevent the spread of the disease into Alberta as well as other parts of Canada. The cities of Edmonton and Calgary have banned elm pruning from March 31 to October 1 since fresh pruning wounds will attract the beetles during the warmer months. The largest surviving urban forest of elm trees in North America is believed to be in the city of Winnipeg, Manitoba, where close to 200,000 elms remain, at least double that of Amsterdam, the elm city of Europe. The city of Winnipeg spends $3 million annually to aggressively combat the disease using Buisman turf and the Dutch trig vaccine, losing 1,500 to 4,000 trees per year. New Zealand Dutch elm disease has reached New Zealand. It was found in Napier where it was eradicated and was also found in the Auckland region in 1989. The Ministry of Agriculture funded a national management program, but it was cancelled to allow more funds to be available for pests of a higher priority. A major outbreak occurred in New Zealand in July 2013, particularly at the site of Kingsheath Hospital, south of Auckland. Auckland has some 20,000 elms. Preventive treatment. The first attempts to control Dutch elm disease consisted of pruning trees to remove and burn diseased timber. While this method was effective in New York State and adjacent areas, its cost made it uneconomical except in large cities where elms were considered valuable attractions. Chemical. When Dutch elm disease spread away from the Atlantic coast, control focused on controlling the bark beetle by means of such insecticides as DDT and aldrin, which were sprayed heavily across all parts of elm trees, usually twice a year in the spring and again at a lower concentration in the summer. In its early years it was generally thought by observers that pesticides did slow the spread of the disease across the United States, but as early as 1947 concern was raised that many bird species were killed in large numbers via ingesting poisoned invertebrates. In areas sprayed during the 1950s, local people observed birds such as the American woodcock, American robin, white-breasted nuthatch, brown creeper and various poaceal species dying. Biologist Rachel Carson consequently argued against spraying elms and for improved sanitation, which she saw as having been more effective in areas with earlier and greater experience countering Dutch elm disease. Although modern critics of Carson have argued that the bird deaths were caused by other factors such as mercury poisoning in the soil, spraying against elm bark beetles declined very rapidly after 1962, a trend aided by fungicides without dangerous side effects being discovered for the first time after many years of research. Lignasan BLP, introduced in the 1970s, was the first fungicide used to control Dutch elm disease. This had to be injected into the base of the tree using specialized equipment, and was never especially effective. It is still sold under the name elm fungicide. Arbortect became available some years later, and it has been proven effective. Arbortect must be injected every 2 to 3 years to provide ongoing control. The disease generally cannot be eradicated once a tree is infected. Arbortect is not effective on root graft infections from adjacent elm trees. It is more than 99.5% effective for 3 years from beetle infections, which is the primary mode of tree infection. Alamo has become available more recently, though several university studies show it to be effective for only the current season it is injected. Alamo is primarily recommended for treatment of oak wilt. Multistriatum is a pheromone produced by female elm bark beetles, which can be produced synthetically. It has potential in being used to trap male beetles, which carry the fungus. Biological. Because of the ban on the use of chemicals on street and park trees in the Netherlands, the University of Amsterdam developed a biological vaccine by the late 1980s. Dutch triggers non-chemical and non-toxic, consisting of a suspension in distilled water of spores of a strain of the fungus Verticillium alboatrum that has lost much of its pathogenic capabilities, injected in the elm in spring. The strain is believed to have enough pathogenicity left to induce an immune response in the elm, protecting it against death during one growing season. This is called induced resistance. Trials with the American elm have been very successful in a 6-year experiment with the American elm in Denver, Colorado. Annual Dutch elm disease losses declined significantly after the first year from 7% to between 0.4 and 0.6%, a greater and more rapid reduction in disease incidence than the accompanying tree sanitation and plant health care programs. Preventive treatment is usually only justified when a tree has unusual symbolic value or occupies a particularly important place in the landscape.